Hello, welcome to the Lalo Dagach podcast. Today, blah. Today. That was my Freudian slip. Freudian slip.
Good. Yeah, that's funny. You're in a good mood today. That's awesome.
All right, let's start again. Hello, welcome to the Lalo Dagach podcast. Today, I'm here again with Khalid Bahraoui. Did I get that right?
Yes, correct.
And I did a past episode with Khalid where we spoke about Donald Trump right after Donald Trump was elected president. I think we recorded it the day before his inauguration.
Correct.
And that was a really good conversation. It's one of the podcasts I really enjoyed doing and both listening to. So if you guys want to check that out, that episode was episode 5. Today, we're going to talk more about Khalid on a personal level and his views about religion. Khalid is originally from Morocco, where he lived most of his life. I believe in the past episode, you said you lived there until you were 27.
Yeah, correct.
And then he moved to the United States, where he became a naturalized citizen and has lived in the United States for over 10 years now.
Yeah, almost 11, yeah.
Yeah. So Khalid has very good understanding of both living in the East and the West. And since our past episode, that was quite a few months ago, me and Khalid have spoken a lot. I have a lot of respect for him. I consider him a very intelligent person. So I wanted to bring him back to talk more about Morocco, about Islam. And thank you for coming back, Khalid.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that. I know that we talked about Trump about 9 months ago. Oh my God, time flies so fast. Actually, maybe my opinion of Trump has shifted slightly, but I still stand with most of what I said in the previous podcast. Just to
Before we get started with the rest, can you tell me like what those maybe few differences you've shifted on?
Yeah, I'm just becoming a little bit more skeptical on the delivery of what he had promised. So I'm on the fence right now, watching and seeing what's going on with the delivery and the execution of what he's saying. The ideas look great on paper, but I'm still waiting on the results. So. It's still early, to be honest, to determine whether or not I was wrong about him completely. But I will wait for, I would say, until January next year. That would make him, he would have been a president for a year. Then we could make a judgment call based upon the results for the entire year. But there's a lot of things that I disagree with him on, and I say those things on the podcast. The whole Twitter craziness, things that don't sound presidential, things that could have been avoided. I know that he doesn't care, and he caters to the people who don't care about political correctness. I agree with that, and I understand that to a certain extent. But when you go back and forth tweeting. And just sounding unprofessional sometimes. I disagree with those comments sometimes. And he stands on global warming. He stands on climate change in general that I disagree with. It's true that to me it wasn't a deciding factor for casting my vote. I'm saying.
You're referring to climate change, right?
To climate change,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what I understand is that you would disagree with his position on that, but it wasn't enough to like get you to not vote for him.
Correct. So most of the things that I took into consideration were his fiscal policies and policies on immigration and so forth, and yeah. So
let's go back to your background. We spoke about it a little bit, but a lot of it has to do with what we're going to talk about here, which is religion and the Middle East. So I always like to get more of a feel of the person and their upbringing, where they're from. So can you talk about where in Morocco are you from?
So I was born in Fez, Morocco, which is a medieval city. It's a beautiful city, by the way. And doing a little bit of marketing for Morocco. Just kidding. But basically, it's a very I would compare it to Damascus or Aleppo. It's a very historic town. Was one of the first cities founded in Morocco. So I was born there, and my family moved to Marrakesh, which is a very known tourist spot, also a historic city. But I would compare it. A lot of people call it the Las Vegas of Morocco or of North Africa. So a lot of tourists from Europe and from a lot of places come to Morocco to see Marrakesh. So I grew up in a city that is open towards tourism and exchange with people from around the world, which was something that I consider beneficial for me. Uh, Being able to spend a lot of my life in a city like Marrakesh. So that's where I am from in Morocco, pretty much.
And
I would say
your
both cities.
and I remember you saying your family was not that religious.
Yeah, my family um, is like most Moroccan families, I would say. But maybe now things are a little bit changing, and we'll talk more about that. But I believe let's just talk about my family. My family is Sunni Muslim, and they are liberal in many aspects. So they believe that religion is personal, and that Islam is peaceful, and that you can practice Islam and just be a peaceful person, and you don't have to judge others, and they believe in the fact that whether or not you're a Muslim doesn't matter. So these are things that not a lot of, or not all Muslims believe. Um, but I would say a lot of Moroccan families have the same idea about Islam, because Moroccan Islam comes from I would say, liberal version, or let me call it a soft version of Islam, and it's Maliki Sunni Islam. I would say that's one of the mildest versions of Sunni Islam. Uh, of course, there are still some aspects that are uh, very extreme comparing to Western standards, but still comparing to Wahhabism, Maliki Islam, as applied 100%, is a lot milder than Wahhabi Islam. So coming back to my family only applies, I would say, 10% of Islam. The cultural aspects of Islam, la Eid, which is the Muslim festivals, the good bits of Islam, taking care of your families, taking care of your loved ones, taking care of the poor, and things like that. My dad drinks, so he doesn't believe that's an issue. And a lot of actually, Morocco is one of the countries where the majority of people drink. It's one of the biggest consumers of alcohol in the Islamic world. That's Morocco. So it's kind of a contradiction, because if you ask people on the street, they'll tell you, okay, uh, um, alcohol is forbidden, but they still drink. And that's a very, sometimes it can be confusing for a lot of people. They say, well, we're Muslims, but we still drink, and hopefully one day we will quit and we will be good Muslims.
Hopefully, we will
So that
we will
that
become
is,
good Muslims.
yes, that's because the ultimate goal is to follow the path of Muhammad as the example, and not drink and not have sex before marriage and those things. But the majority of Moroccans do just that. They have sex before marriage. The majority do, and the majority drink. But just to stay within the answer, or within your question, answer your question. yes, my family is very liberal. They do practice Islam, especially my mom. My dad is kind of, has a lot of, he criticizes Islam quite a bit. But for my mom, it's a personal thing, and because she was raised in a very Islamic environment, in an Andalusi family. So let me walk you through what an Andalusi family means. It's the descendants of Muslims of Spain. And the Muslims of Spain, when they came to Morocco, they brought that very tolerant version of Islam that only focuses on, being a good person, being good to your neighbor, being good to your family, and at the same time, a little bit of um, conservatism when it comes to, sometimes wearing the hijab and so forth, but not as extreme as Wahhabism, for example. So my grandfather, who prayed 5 times a day, who was a very, I would say, Sufi Muslim. I mean, in Sufism, maybe I need to walk you through the differences. But Sufi Islam is more on a spiritual kind of Islam. Is I would compare it to the Buddhist monks. If you think about people who practice Sufism on a daily basis, there are people who, or the Christian Franciscans, for example, and the Catholic Church. I'm not sure if you know about Franciscanos. So a little bit of,
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
focusing on oneself, becoming the best human you can be. So that my grandfather was like that. And my mother learned what she learned from him. She learned those aspects of tolerance and so forth. And she didn't have to cover. She had two sisters. She has two sisters. They did not have to cover. She was able to wear jeans. She was able to wear mini skirt. She was able to wear bikinis in the 50s and 60s in Morocco, while my grandfather was a very religious man. So that gives you an idea of how the original Islam was for the last couple of 100 years until recently. And maybe I can walk you through the differences at some point during the podcast.
Also,
Why this?
I want to know, how involved was Islam in your life routine? Did you go to mosque? Did you have to? Was there any teaching of Islam in school? Did you ever have to memorize Quran or read Quran, that kind of thing? And how
Yes,
typical is that in Morocco? So if are they more religious than your upbringing, or less religious than your upbringing?
great question. I would say I am on the more moderate side, but there are a lot of Moroccans who were brought up to memorize Quran and in a way more strict families.
How many people, like what percentage would you say, in where you live, that's
At the
typical?
time I lived in Morocco, at the time I would say during my teenage and my childhood, I would say the majority were like me. But then things have changed through the years with the influence of Wahhabism and the return of the strict Islam little by little. To answer the
Can I
question,
just stop you there for a second? I just want to
sure.
highlight that I've been talking to a lot of people on my podcasts, people from all over the Arab world, and they all are telling me that there's a more fundamentalist version of Islam growing in their country, and so much of it has to do with the influence of Saudi Arabia, not just in the Middle East. I mean, like somebody like Yasmin Mohammed, who was on my podcast, she even described when she was very young in Canada how her mosque became more fundamentalist in Canada because of the influence of Saudi money. So this is everywhere. It seems to be a recurring theme I'm hearing from people.
Correct.
Yeah.
And especially during the post 1992 to 1995 Bosnian War, Saudi Arabia started investing in Bosnia and Herzegovina, building mosques, and trying to indoctrinate young Bosnians and telling them the Islam you were being following is fiasco. It's not correct. This is the Islam we need to teach you. And with the Bosnians not knowing Arabic and thinking, oh my God, we've been wrong all these years, and that's why we have been, God is mad at us, and we have been, like, our country has been destroyed with the war, so we need to go to the right path. So Saudi Arabia used that argument, and there has been a lot of growing extremism in Bosnia and the Balkan region. Now, going down to North Africa, North Africa, he's kind of similar. Like North Africa has a different culture. Morocco, by the way, is not an Arab country. Morocco is an Arab-speaking country. So it's a different story when it comes to the cultural differences between Morocco and the Middle East or Saudi Arabia.
I
Even
really wanted to ask you about that, if Moroccans consider themselves Arab. So they don't consider themselves Arab?
Well, whether they do or don't, the facts don't consider them Arab. But now the majority, I mean, there's a growing number of youth or young people who now recognize that they are not Arabs. But I know that the ones who are Amazighs, which is the first inhabitants of North Africa, the Amazighs were the main or the people of the land before the Muslims took over Morocco. They are now representing roughly 45% or maybe more from a linguistic standpoint. People who speak Amazigh are about 45% of Morocco. But they do also speak Arabic because they have to. Why? Because it was the language of the oppressor, the language of the violator, and the language of the person or the people who took over their land. The same way they took other lands like Palestine and other places. Palestine is not an Arab place. It was taken over by the Arabs. Same thing for Morocco. But Morocco had, once the Berbers were defeated and some of them embraced Islam, those Berbers were used to conquer Spain. A lot of Arabs, and I'm not being sectarian here. Arabs are my friends. Arabs, I'm not kind of pointing out that we're Berbers versus Arabs. I consider myself everything. I mean, I'm a mix of a lot of things. So I'm not talking from a racist perspective or sectarian perspective, but I'm talking about historic facts. A lot of Arabs think that the Spain, or the quote unquote glory of Islamic world, is based on Arabic conquest of Spain. It isn't. The leader, the military leader who took over Spain was Amazigh. Tariq ibn Ziyad is an Amazigh fighter that embraced Islam. So there is a huge cultural difference between Morocco and let's say Egypt, though Egypt is not Arab either. It's a mix of Egyptian and Arabic cultures. Morocco is very different compared to Saudi Arabia, way more different from a lot of aspects as far as culture, as far as customs, as far as things that the way we practice Islam, obviously. So that has a huge impact. Though now with the rise of Wahhabism, they're trying to remind us, or to remind Moroccans, that the source of Islam is Saudi Arabia, is the land of Islam. Ardul Islam is Mecca and Medina. So now a lot of Moroccans, like I would say, emotionally take or start following those, whatever you tell them is coming from Saudi Arabia, or whatever you tell them Muhammad said, they would want to follow it because it's an emotional thing to them, even if they don't connect with it, even though it's not who they are. So that's what I wanted to point out about.
Oh, and also, can you talk about what I said about how common the practice or teaching of Islam is in schools or society?
Right. So let's get back to that. That's a great question. There, in Morocco, there are two types of, I would say, elementary or pre-K school. So pre-K, I mean, before you start elementary school, you can either go to a Quranic school or go to a private kindergarten or a missionary kindergarten. We say missionary, but la mission, or the French mission at the time, where we still do have a cultural presence from the French since the era of colonialism or protectorate, whatever. So the French stayed in Morocco from 1912 to 1956, and we have a lot of strong ties with France. and we still have French institutions in Morocco, high schools, elementary schools, though they're very limited, and they're uh, for the majority of the people who go to French schools are the elite of Moroccan society. So you've got the people, especially the lower middle class, who are religious. They'll send their kids to what we say the Quranic school, or Msid, the Quranic school. So they teach them Quran, and they will keep repeating it until they learn it by heart. And after that, they will go to elementary school where they learn regular curriculum. But at the meantime, they will have to learn Quran as part of the program. And there's something called Islamic education is part of the curriculum throughout your childhood and high school. And unless you...
And what would that involve, that curriculum?
That involves a kind of a mild version of Islam. That involves Islam that works for the system. Let me walk you through it. Moroccan system is, we have a monarchy, and the king is supposed to be the commander of the faithful and the descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. So he cannot go against Islam. He has to present Islam as legit so that he can preserve his status as a legit commander of the faithful and the king at the same. Commander of the faithful is like the Pope / king. So the king has both powers. He also has the judicial power, which means Morocco is a absolute monarchy, and we do not have checks and balances at all.
Since 1666, right? It's a monarchy.
Well, no, it's always been a monarchy. We've always had a sultan.
Or maybe I'm referring, I think, because I was looking it up before talking to you, maybe I'm referring specifically to the Alawite royalty.
To the Alawites have ruled Morocco for 300, and I'm not sure exactly, but more than 300 years.
Yeah, that's probably what I was looking. I saw.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you're talking about the Alawites, and yeah, before we didn't, the king wasn't called king; he was called a sultan. Sultan in Arabic means all powerful, almighty, pretty much. So the name changed to king after the French left, and the first king Moroccans had was the King Hassan, who was kind of presents himself as a modern king, but at the same time wants to preserve the Islamic foundation of Morocco. So he was like surfing, kind of keeping that balance between keeping Islam as a legitimate religion, but at the same time not allowing the Salafist to take over Morocco. So he was keeping that balance for quite some time until he died. And after he died, I mean, 3 years or 4 years after he died, we started having those Salafi movements because the new king was not oppressing them as much. So we had the first terrorist attack in 2003. The first king died King Hassan died in 1999. So anyway, so that's going back to answer the question on the Islamic teaching in Morocco. It's not by any means close to any Middle Eastern country. Most of the school programs are presenting Islam as a spiritual thing, as a religion of peace, as things of that nature. My dad decided not to send me to the Quranic school. I went to a French private school when I was little. So I learned French and Arabic really early on. And he was against this whole idea of Msid. He was just skeptical about it from a doctrine standpoint. But also there were a lot of incidents with those imams being pedophiles and molesting those children. So he was like, I'm not going to send my child to Msid to be molested by some imam. Yeah, my dad was very aware of what's happening in society. He's an engineer, but also a sociologist. He studied sociology as well, and he studied the Moroccan society quite deeply. So he told me about those things at a very early age. Which is very rare in Moroccan society and conservative societies in general. Parents don't talk to their kids about these things. So yeah, I mean, there were cases of child molestation in some mosques. I'm not saying all imams are like that, but he was just basically, I'm not sending you there. They're going to indoctrinate you. And it's not like I asked him to send me there. He was just talking about it, and he was criticizing parents who were sending their kids to those types of institutions. So that's basically how it is when it comes to Islamic teachings or Islamic schools in Morocco. Is mostly Islam as Islam tailored to cater to the system, to the Moroccan system, which is the absolute monarchy that we have. So,
Do you remember when you felt like you had become an atheist, that you properly were completely non-believing in religion?
it took some time. I started like doubting. It's like a domino effect. I started doubting uh, uh, religion by I think I will tell you one of the first things that made me question religion was the whole sex slavery, and the fact that Islam allowed, or Quran allowed, men to beat their wives. I was thinking, why would God allow such a thing? Why would God even recommend such a thing? So I started looking into it, and I realized that in Hadith as well, women are not allowed to refuse sex from their husbands, and if they do, like the angels will spend their night cursing them, like the angels had nothing to do. That's their full-time job. So, and that's really why I started like digging more, looking into it, looking at the history of sex slavery in Islamic world that spread across the region, and caused the enslavement of 2.5 million innocent people.
Can I
In
ask you something? I want to start asking people, if I speak to them who have lived in the Middle East in some country. I started doing this in the last podcast with Mohammed Al Qadra, who's from Jordan. A lot of people use statistics from Pew Research online. I do this. I've noticed, even critics of Islam or ex-Muslims use these numbers because it's kind of hard to get general statistics or to get an idea of what life is like in a lot of these Muslim majority countries. But I want to know if the numbers kind of match to what your impression is of Morocco. Morocco is one of the countries that there was a lot of times missing from a lot of these statistics, which is unfortunate. But for example, it says support for making Sharia the official law of the country. I found that surprising. It was very high. It was at 83%.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've read that. Yeah.
And to throw you some more, and you can comment on all of them, it says Muslims who say Islam alone leads to heaven, 94%. It's necessary to believe in God to be moral, 95%. That Western entertainment, music, movies, television hurts morality, 72%. Do those numbers kind of match your impression of Morocco?
Of Morocco today, absolutely, 100%.
Oh, really?
100%. Yes, yes.
Mm.
But I'll tell you, like the timeline, Morocco, like, compared to Afghanistan and to Iran, back in the 60s and 50s, people didn't give a shit about hijab. We had people here and there wearing a traditional hayek, which is a cover of the body, or a traditional niqab, which is it's a very transparent cloth that they put on their faces. But that was mostly a traditional thing and cultural thing than really an Islamic thing. But in the 60s and 70s, we had a wave of openness, and people have started to move away from Islam slowly, right? I believe what happened was an intervention, an empowerment of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. By empowering the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, which came from the United States, that they thought it was a way to defeat communism taking over the region. So the Muslim Brotherhood started spreading their ideas in Egypt and across the region, all the way to Morocco. So in the 80s, we started seeing. I like in the elementary school, we had nobody with a hijab in the 80s, zero. And towards the end of the 80s, we started seeing here and there hijabis, and we used to think it's very odd. It's that hijab and the way it's put on, like the way women put it on their head, the way they applied that scarf is very Egyptian. It wasn't Moroccan. So, an
Oh, so
Egyptian
but
from
can
the
I'm
Brotherhood.
sorry, that's really interesting because I always see people put kind of these memes, which sometimes historical pictures of Iran and Afghanistan and Iraq and maybe Morocco, and they show, look, women in this time weren't wearing hijab and they were dressed very Western and they were modernizing, and then they say, look at it now, and people have more hijab and more niqab, and a lot of these times these are just Twitter accounts of people in the West. But you're saying you lived through that. You saw when you were young that people didn't wear hijab, and suddenly you saw slowly it come in.
Yes, absolutely. The king has oppressed, and even people have rejected the extreme doctrine for the in the 50s and 60s and 70s, all the way, especially when the Shah of Iran fell, and we saw how Iran became. We didn't have social media then, but you could see the impact. The king was freaking out. He was like, "There's no way in hell I would allow such a thing to take over Morocco."
I think it was the
Uh,
first televised revolution of the Middle East, actually, that of Iran.
Yeah, correct. It was very different. It was Shia, but still, there's like I'll give you now the other issues that were happening in Morocco. Like there was a lot of tension happening towards the end of the 80s. Well, you have the Brotherhood being very empowered at that point. If you listened to a speech from Jamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt in the 70s, and actually, sorry, in not the 70s, I believe it's in the mid 60s or the late 50s. He was talking about hijab as a ridiculous thing. I will send you the video, but he was saying,
I've seen it.
you've seen it.
Yeah, he was saying he had a conversation with a member of the Muslim Brotherhood who was asking him to impose the hijab on women in his country, and he was saying this to Parliament, and they all started laughing. He said, "Why don't you put it on?" And
On your dog. Yeah, on
yeah,
your
and he
dog.
said, he pointed out that his daughter, of this guy from the Muslim Brotherhood, your daughter doesn't wear hijab. You want me to impose it on all women in my country? You can't even get your own daughter to wear it. But it
Correct.
shows that even in Egypt, decades ago, Egyptians would laugh at that notion, and today it's very common that women wear the hijab.
I mean, I would say 80% of women now wear hijab, and if women don't wear hijab, they will shame them for it. Morocco doesn't have, has not reached that, but we're getting there. So again, towards the 80s, the end of the 80s, you've got the Muslim Brotherhood getting very, very powerful, and then the beginning of the 90s, you've got the Wahhabis getting more involved in the region with when the war in Bosnia started. And by the way, Bin Laden started there in Bosnia. So, and then in the beginning of the 90s, you've got Algeria right next to us getting radicalized, and a crazy, absolutely horrific civil war started between the liberals and the new uh, uh, Islamic Front. 1 million people died, Lalo, in Algeria as a result of this conflict. Morocco was like shielding itself from this. And the king of Morocco at the time, from 92 all the way to 99 when he died, was completely making sure, I mean, enforcing security and making sure that none of that slips through to Morocco. But we had ideas slip through because in the 1992, 1993, I would say the beginning of the 90s, we started having those satellite channels. Back in the day, we used to only have one or two channels, state channels. We could not hear or see anything from the outside world. Now we all of a sudden the Moroccans are listening to the Muslim Brotherhood channels in Egypt. They're listening to the Wahhabi channels in Saudi Arabia, and they're getting more indoctrinated. And they are getting more brainwashed, indoctrinized, and getting more Islamic in the sense Muhammad preaches or preached. So they're like more focused on the hadith. The imams started getting inspired by a lot more radical views. However, Moroccan government always had a police guy in the mosque to make sure that the speech was not radical. So that's one thing that helped Morocco from a security perspective. That's why Morocco is not going. It has been one of the best countries to crack down or to control the spread of terrorism and Islamic fundamentalism in the country. However, the people who felt oppressed, people who felt like the Moroccan government is corrupt and is spreading bad ideas and changing the religion, have started getting more and more radicalized, and they were like, okay, well, let's blow up. So they did the first terrorist attack in 2003, and that kept going, and those kept going as far as the ideas, not the terrorist attacks. So the ideas kept spreading, and these people, when the war in Bosnia started, a lot of them went. And when the war in Syria started, we sent about 3,000 Moroccans are now in Syria fighting with Islamic State. A lot of their military commanders are Moroccans. And Morocco has a very strict policy. If you go to Syria, you can't come back. If you come back and get arrested, 4 years in jail or the death sentence, though we don't really apply it. Sometimes we say, okay, well, you're sentenced to death, but we don't carry it out. So,
I mean, I find it interesting. You use a lot the how should I say, how much freedom women have in a country to measure this. I've been told before by other people, such as in a podcast I did with Gada and Yasmin, Gada being from Saudi Arabia. They told me you can always look to the women to see how fundamentalist a group is or a society is in Islam. And I just want to point out a couple more statistics from Pew Research, and there's like 4 statistics here, and they show a duality of thought that I think shows both the old thinking of Morocco towards the new, which is more fundamentalist. So it says that the percentage of people who believe the wife must always obey the husband, 92%. Sons and daughters should have equal inheritance, only 15%. So that shows kind of a negative look towards women and their rights. But then at the same time, I found statistics that said that should women be able to decide if they want to veil, 85%, which is better. And women should have the right to divorce, 73%. So you have these contradictory statistics, and is it because of this transition of thought and fundamentalism in the country?
No, it's because Morocco is contradictory in itself as a country. There's a lot of ideas that are contradictory. You've got the guy who's sleeping around and drinking wants a virgin. He wants to marry a virgin according to Islam, but Islam teaches to stay virgin for both. You have to remain virgin. I mean, men and women cannot have sex before marriage, but most men don't care, and men are not judged on this, but women are. You've got a lot of other things. I mean, this makes sense. The Pew Research makes sense because when they are asked the question, they're putting they put their religious hat. If they say, for example, the question that you asked, what was it like? Do you need God to be moral? 95%. Even if they didn't believe it, they'll say yes because they would think that God would judge them if they say no. You know what I mean? So it's a very complicated, but it's a religious thought. It's not honest.
Is this what these people were referring to in your Facebook group that is dedicated especially towards Moroccan atheists? You mentioned that you were going to be on my podcast, and you asked what should I talk about, and I noticed a lot of people said hypocrisy in Morocco, and they use that word a lot, and I was kind of wondering what they meant. Is this kind of the thing they were referring to?
That is one of those things, the hypocrisy, and so like for example, Moroccan society, like you cannot, like I said, people like to sleep around and go to prostitutes and stuff, but they would judge a woman if she gets pregnant, and they wouldn't help her. I mean, it's a very shameful to be pregnant, to get pregnant before marriage. Nobody would blame the guy. It's always the girl. And of course, we know that Islam is patriarchal, but still, this is a lot of contradiction. And there are a lot of other examples that I could mention about the whole hypocrisy.
I actually couldn't find the statistics on the view of homosexuality in Morocco, but there was a case just in 2016 of two teenage girls, but in their late teens, hugging and kissing in public, and they were arrested. They were acquitted and they weren't actually sentenced to jail, but they were arrested and they could have faced jail. And just the fact that they were arrested was kind of shocking considering Morocco's history. How is the view in general towards homosexuality in Morocco?
I am very, very familiar with that case. I actually got involved in that case, and to help out. And fortunately they were able to. I contacted some of my friends, and some of them were members of the group, and some of them have contacts with the Moroccan Human Rights Association. So we were able to get them out, but the most shocking part was, like, they were not doing it in public. They were doing it on the rooftop of their house. But one of the girls' mothers actually called the police. So the mother, following her Islamic upbringing, she called the police to kind of give them a lesson. But when they were arrested, the mother kind of regretted it, and she started trying to get them out of there. But still, it was already too late. You already filed a report that your daughter, like those two girls, were kissing, and though there's nothing really forbids kissing, but you're not supposed to have sexual interactions or sexual or any kind of expression of I would say how do you call that, public display of affection, whether you're heterosexual or homosexual. And even worse, when you're homosexual, it's homosexuality and the act of having sex with somebody who's the same sex. You are punishable by law up to, I think, 6 months in prison. And they have applied once. They have applied it on a gay couple because they were a gay activist and they were kissing in the streets to kind of show that they are fed up with that. And they were arrested and they went to jail for 4 months, I believe. And the reason why the Moroccan system did not abolish those laws is because now, with the growing extremism in Morocco, people would think, okay, well, now the king is allowing homosexuality to take place. So what are we? Are we still Muslims or not? And that would provoke a revolution against the king, and he doesn't want to deal with that. So he would just let it happen and let it go. He wouldn't abolish those rules, though I don't believe he cares about those rules as much as some of the Moroccan society does care about those rules. So,
but how does the general public feel towards homosexuality? Would you say in general it's negative?
Negative, absolutely, yes. Very, very negative, especially male homosexuality. Men with men having sex with men is an abomination. But yeah, I mean, Islam rejects homosexuality and punishes homosexuality, though people may say that it doesn't. It does. Moroccan society absolutely rejects homosexuality. Gay marriage probably will not happen in even 300 years in Morocco. So
that's a really interesting. I mean, even in the bastion of so many countries that people look to say, like, oh, this is a liberal Muslim country, there's certain things where it's still they're not even close to getting there yet. And I mean, that's for gay rights, but even women's rights, as I understand, there's a lot of limitations for women. For example, does FGM exist in Morocco? I don't know.
No, it does not. Zero.
It doesn't. Okay.
It does not. Because we apply a Maliki version of Islam, and it that does not include FGM. FGM exists in Shafi'i and other sects or other versions of Islam, like in Egypt and the Horn of Africa. It is not an African problem. It is an Islamic problem. Uh, it existed before Islam, but Islam did not abolish it in those places, and Muhammad encouraged it in a lot of those hadiths, and who are sahih hadiths, not fake hadiths. So FGM doesn't exist. Women's rights, good point. I think I mentioned it during the podcast when we talked about Trump. Uh, uh, but women can. We have a lot of smart women in Morocco. A lot of them are very excellent academically, and they reach very good positions. We have doctors, lawyers, we have people in the parliament, we have ministers. I mean, work in the government. High positions. The king's wife is open and she's not wearing a hijab or anything like that. So to kind of encourage that emancipation of women, so that's there, but the society is still very patriarchal and society is very oppressive towards women, and they still look at women as something like that is below them. Um, I mean, comparing to, I would say, to other countries, we probably are ahead. Morocco is ahead, but I believe now Tunisia is getting ahead of Morocco with those recently when they passed equal inheritance for women and men, and also the ability for women to marry a non-Muslim. Those are forbidden in Morocco because of Islam. These are not just cultural things. Islam does not allow women to have
up
the
until
same
what year
inheritance.
could women not marry a non-Muslim?
Muslim women cannot marry non-Muslims unless they convert in Morocco.
But is it still like that, or did they change the
It
law?
is. It is still like that. It
Oh,
changed
it's
in
still like
Tunisia.
that.
In Tunisia,
Oh,
it
in
changed.
Tunisia.
Yeah.
Oh, in
It's,
Morocco, they still can't.
still cannot. Yes.
Wow, that's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought that about Morocco.
A lot of guys actually pretend they converted. So you just go and say I converted, and that's it. But
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 Muslim men can marry non-Muslim women.
of course, because that's a male dominating religion. It's a patriarchal religion. The man has to keep his religion, or has to be the Muslim one, so that at least the household is Islamic, and that's how it worked for during the type of the Muhammad's time and on. So because men dominated the household then, after Islam, obviously, because before Islam, women also were able to dominate the household. Muhammad's wife dominated the household before Islam. So
And this prohibition to not marry Muslim men is completely in the Quran. I've read it myself, and it's
yes,
very explicit.
yes, and in Hadith too.
Hadith too. Um, so can oh, may I should I'll bring this up that in also in the Facebook group, which I really like, you really engage with the women who are Moroccan, a lot of them atheists, and I think a lot of them are still in Morocco, and you ask them a lot about the oppression they faced in Morocco. So I really enjoy how you focus on them and you ask them about their problems. You ask them about if they face less catcalling and maybe harassment on the street if they wear hijab versus not wearing hijab. And most of them said that it's exactly the same. And those who didn't say it was the same said they faced more harassment when wearing the hijab, which I thought was really interesting. Quite a few women on that page referred to that. How would you say is the treatment of women publicly in Morocco?
Yeah, it's a very sensitive topic. Moroccans face a lot of street harassment. Moroccan women do face a lot of street harassment, whether it starts from mild catcalling or flirting or saying you're beautiful, you're this, you're that, to following, to touching, to holding, to kidnapping and rape. So it has different stages, and rape in Morocco is an epidemic. Most recently, there was a video of a girl was raped in the bus, and it went viral worldwide. And that is the issue with it is that society blames the victim mostly. Even the parents of these girls blame them. Even the police, when you go report a rape case, they'll blame you. They'll tell you, why did you go to their place? If a girl went to somebody's place and he raped her, they would blame her for going to his place. You're not supposed to go to his place, they'll say. Or if a girl gets raped in somebody's car because she just recklessly decides to jump in somebody's car because he talked to her in a way that led her to do this, and takes her somewhere and rapes her, she cannot go to the police and say, well, he took me and raped me. Well, why did you go in the car? And that's why a lot of girls don't report rape. And even if they report it and the person gets convicted, it's maximum jail time of 5 years. And back up until 2012, the rapists the victim was given the chance to actually marry the rapist, and he would be able to be freed. And it most recently was abolished in Tunisia as well. It's a practice because mostly the concern is not the rape, the concern is the virginity. Society focuses so much on the virginity, and it's still an issue in Morocco. Being a virgin is important if you want to get married. Again, the same patriarchal stuff. So women are pressured to keep their virginity, so they get creative, when it comes to sexual life, in order not to have vaginal penetration. But if they get raped, they'll focus more on their virginity. Their parents will focus more on their virginity. Society will focus more on their virginity than the fact that she was actually fucking raped. And that's the issue. Okay, and yes, going back to catcalling, it is very common. It can be very aggressive sometimes, and there's no laws to prevent that from happening. There's no laws to prevent that. So, and if somebody complains, they'll tell them, well, why did you wear a short skirt? Why did you wear tight pants? But the reality is, everybody gets catcalled. Everybody gets touched, whether they wear hijab or not. And in certain cases, the girls that when they were wearing hijab, they were more harassed because people would focus on them more and scrutinize the dress code. Because if you wear hijab, you're supposed to cover up and whatever. And if you wear pants, people will start in comments about, well, this is not proper hijab. Or they would think of it as an attractive thing. So when you're covered, you're harder to get and things like that. And that's how the mentality is. And that's why some of those hijabis were attacked more than non-hijabis. And covering has never helped, never. In fact, the women who were told that you should cover in order to avoid harassment actually didn't help them at all. It's just an idea that is actually promoted by, again, the same Wahhabi Islamic mindset by men and by women too. Women raise their daughters a different way. They raise them to protect themselves. They raise them in a way that they shouldn't be hanging out with boys. They should protect their virginity. They should do this. They should do that. They should listen to the brother because the brother is the man. And they'll talk to the brothers completely differently. The brother will be given power over their sisters. And by extension, the society is given the man more power over women in general. In the workplace, there will be more harassment in the workplace. Yes, Moroccan women can work. Yes, they can get they can achieve really high career goals, but they would still have to deal with harassment everywhere they go.
So considering that Morocco is such a patriarchal place, it sounds like men have a lot of power there. So why would you move to the United States and become a citizen there? Isn't it great for a guy in Morocco? So I'm asking, what made you want to move to the States and become a citizen?
Yeah, actually, it's not. Well, guys have their own problems too.
Right.
I mean, guys, there's not. I mean, even if you, for example, let's say you have a girlfriend, and that's not one of the reasons why I moved here, but let's give you an example. You have a girlfriend, and you cannot actually go to a hotel room or book a hotel room if you don't have a marriage license. That's a ridiculous law that we have in Morocco. You
Really?
have, yes, ridiculous. But if you have an American passport, and she does have an American or French passport, regardless, you'll be able to be given a room, which is also ridiculous. If you There are so many laws like that, and Moroccan guys are oppressed too. I need to point that out. Not just girls. Moroccan guys are oppressed politically. There are a lot of things well, I know this podcast is not about politics, but recently there has been a series of protests about basic needs, things that freedom like freedom of speech, education system in Morocco is ruined. It needs a major makeover, and a lot opportunities are not. I mean, basically, there are not a lot of opportunities in Morocco for young guys, even the most talented ones. I'll be honest, my life in Morocco was fine. I mean, I had a job, my family's upper middle class, things like that. But I'm talking in general, a lot of Moroccans just want to leave, and some of them actually cross the Detroit of Gibraltar illegally to go to Europe to escape the the poverty and a lot of social things that they're frustrated about. Uh, Getting married in Morocco is very difficult. It's very expensive. Sometimes girls have high demands, and that the guys cannot fulfill if they don't have a job. You can't get married, but also you can't have sex outside of marriage because of those restrictions. You cannot you cannot get a hotel room easily if you go to an apartment, and the people who are going to rent you the apartment now, with the growing of Islamization of Morocco, they would ask you if she's married to you or not. So you have to have your own house, and in order to have your own house, you have to be you have to have a high income, and that's one of those frustrations that lead a lot of Moroccans to leave. And not just Moroccans, I mean, most people from the MENA region, except for Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and those oil rich countries that take care of their people, and them, um, in Saudi Arabia, they'll take care of a lot of your stuff without having to work. So
So, can you tell me about your experience moving to the States? What appealed to you? Was it what you imagined it to be, or were there disappointments, or was it even better than you imagined? Like, what was that experience like?
yeah, I mean, my idea was to come here and do a management training, and then maybe go for a master's degree, which is what I've done, but I've interrupted it at some point, and I'm going down for an executive MBA at this point. But what I liked about it, what I liked about the United States is the Constitution, the liberty, things that are very, very simple for Americans, like the ability to do whatever you want to do under the law. Things that I was not able to do in Morocco, criticizing, the system, criticizing the king openly. Here you can criticize the president openly. You can have fun without being interrupted by police. You can do a lot of things that are considered simple aspects of life, but they're a lot easier to do here. I love the fact that the opportunities are limitless here. If you work hard, you can be whoever you want to be, actually. And the education system, higher education system is amazing. Even at work, there's not that aspect of dictatorship. In Morocco, having a boss is having a dictator telling you what to do on a daily basis. In here is different, is more of a colleague relationship. And I had to be taught that too, because when I came in, I was a little bit of a small dictator when it comes to, like my management style.
How do
So
you mean by that? Is there a cultural difference there you're referring to?
yes, yeah. So bosses are more of a little dictators. It's a mentality. I mean, I was less of a dictator, to be honest, but the majority of Moroccan bosses are very dictatorial. Uh, and actually, dictatorship starts at home. The dad, which wasn't the case for my dad, but the dad is usually like holds the entire home with an iron fist. So you have to listen to your dad, and otherwise everything will go wrong. So yeah, so even the management style is like I am your boss, and you do what I tell you to do, pretty much. But it's changing. I mean, there are some young leaders now that are leading the country. I mean, on the business world, in the business world, to a different direction. But I still believe that there is a lot of dictatorial bosses, people who use their power to abuse their employees, whether they're men or women, and sometimes sexually abuse their women who actually their female workers who actually reached out to me many times to complain about those issues and see if they can legally prosecute these bosses. But here, it's really difficult to do that because of the laws. The laws are very strong and they're applied, and people will listen to victims. We have, even in big companies now, I work in a big corporation. It's structured, and the human resources folks are usually take those kind of complaints seriously. You can't make sexual remarks in the workplace, a lot of other things, and in general, I believe America has its problems, has its issues. I'm an optimistic person. I see the big picture, and I think America is the best package. I mean, a lot of people don't admit that, or don't want to admit that, but it's the best package available in the world with its good, with its pros and cons. It is absolutely the best package available. And to answer your question, whether or not it's better or worse than my expectation. Actually, it exceeded my expectations, and that's why I decided to stay.
Well, I mean, you said there kind of what you enjoyed about the freedoms of the U.S. How do you feel about now about how Americans see Islam uh, and its relation to the people? To treat Islam and the nominal term Muslims as a race, even if some people will say it's not a race, they'll still treat it as such. For example, you probably know that famous scene with Sam Harris speaking on Bill Maher's Real Time, and Ben Affleck calls him a racist for criticizing Islam. Do you think he's doing a favor to people in the Middle East when Ben Affleck accuses him of racist? Or in general terms, now there seems to be an apologia attitude to defend Islam in the name of Muslims. How do you think that affects people in the Middle East?
Uh, I believe Ben Affleck's comments serve the people who are more extremist when it comes to Islam, who do not want Islam criticized. Even moderate Muslims want to criticize the doctrine. Moderate Muslims criticize to an extent some of the aspects of the doctrine. But saying that criticizing Islam is actually racist or or bigotry, that's not the case. That is an idea that was promoted or spread by the Muslim Brotherhood to prevent people from criticizing Islam. So when you say, when you start like I'm doing now, I'm not being Islamophobic, by the way, that's a fake word, but let's say is anti-Muslim bigotry. I'm not anti-Muslim because my family is Muslim, and a lot of beautiful and amazing people that I know are Muslims. Criticizing their religion doesn't mean I'm criticizing them. However, Islam teaches that. Islam teaches if that the religion is part of you, and you're part of it. So if somebody criticizes your religion, and if you're like a devout Muslim, you will take it personally, and that's why it's Ben Affleck's comments were very popular in the Islamic world, and it's especially popular when somebody that is not even a Muslim or is white is defending, quote unquote, defending Muslims. And Ben Affleck is the typical liberal from the West who thinks Islam is the religion of the savages, brown people, and I'm here to defend them, right? So when he says this is racist, this is gross, he's referring to Muslims as brown and a different race, while Islam is has no race. Muslims from around the world have embraced the religion. You've got white Muslims, you've got brown Muslims, you've got Chinese Muslims, that has nothing to do with race. If Bill Maher had criticized Christianity, I believe Ben Affleck wouldn't have said it's a racist because this Christianity has no race. So, but for him, for Ben Affleck's, in Ben Affleck's mind, Islam has one race, or at least brown people are the followers of Islam, or black people, or the oppressed. So let's help them out. That is the new idea that is really popular, especially post-Trump nomination, is that um, when you criticize Islam, you're bad, and we are the amazing Western liberals who are going to come and deliver you from those evil people who criticize Islam, whether they are ex-Muslims or whether they are Westerners. Facts don't matter at this point. What matters is for us to do some virtue signaling and to look like we are the saviors of the world. And they're doing this just for themselves, and they're not helping anyone, and not helping anyone by any means.
Do you think also Muslims are taking advantage of those people and their ideas?
Absolutely. For example, ISIS is happy to hear those things because they don't want people to start looking into Islam and finding the holes and the issues within it. So they want to stop and silence anybody who criticizes Islam. That's been happening since the creation of Islam. Anybody who was criticizing Muhammad was killed. So no, there was no room for criticism of Islam. There's no room to give or to make people think. There was no room for philosophy until later on, and even a lot of those philosophers had to fear for their life later on. So you cannot criticize Islam because that makes it weaker, that exposes it. And the fundamentalists don't look at that. And they use it in a different way. They go, imagine, look at those Christians. They're defending religion. And you Muslims, who you're supposed to defend your religion, you're not doing that. Look at and given an example that way. So they use that propaganda differently. And that's sad because now you cannot make people think. You cannot bring up issues within Islam because now the West has been so brainwashed that they will never engage in such a conversation. They are scared to be called racists. It's now one of those territories where you cannot go anymore. You know, it's worse than the whole slave trade history of the United States. Now it's one of the most controversial or one of the most sensitive topics there is. So I mean, since Bill Maher and Sam Harris were criticized, Sam Harris had thousands of tweets the next day and articles calling him a racist bigot. So he's still spending a lot of time in his talks and his podcasts saying that he's not a racist bigot. So a lot of people do not want to fall in that trap and end up having to explain themselves or become a victim of character assassination. They'd rather jump on that ship and go, all right, I am the defender of the oppressed, and get thousands and millions of likes and make money on YouTube or whatever their goal is. Now it's easy to come out and start talking about Islam as the religion of peace, and as a Westerner, you'll get a lot of attention from the Islamic world because they are craving that. They want somebody to say that because they know it's not true deep inside. They know. But they want somebody to say that so that the West stops focusing on their religion as the source of terrorism.
Well, let's talk about the source of terrorism, because a lot of people now, even in the people who are critical of Islam and are atheists or things like that, they now seem to have compromised their criticism into pushing the idea of quote unquote reform. And reform, a lot of people like to define it different ways, but basically it's to keep the text, but to say meanings of words are different or phrases are different, or to modify it to Islam to make it adaptable to the West and liberal values and Islam light, if you will. and they want to repackage it and throw it back at the Muslim world and say, adopt this. And people think this is a solution to terrorism globally. I'm more than skeptical on this, but I'm asking a lot of people who are have more experience living in under Islam, around in a Muslim majority country. What is your view on this idea of reform?
Yeah, that is a great idea. I do not believe in reform simply because Islam does not like reform. Islam says it. I don't believe any other religion says that Islam is that reform is forbidden. Muhammad himself said for reform or changing the religion is bid'ah, and bid'ah is dalala, which is you have lost your way and you will go to hell. So that is Muhammad was very smart in putting what I call, this is my expression, I call it factory reset button that is built within Islam, that factory reset button, just like the iPhone reset button, resets itself back to the 7th century anytime. Even if you've tried and added all these reform apps, one time, one day, all of a sudden, somebody will come up and say, oh, let's get back to square one. And that is the factory reset button that is still there, and it will never go away because of those hadiths that he left, because of all these things that he discussed, because of talking about it over and over and over again. And Islam has to yearn for becoming the most perfect religion that will dominate the world. That is the only religion that has that as a goal. And that is the issue with Islam. Even if you reform it, and if the West tries to push a reformed version of Islam and spread it and talk about it as a nice thing, the true Muslims who follow Islam 100% will not agree with them, and they think that's the wrong Islam, and that's rejected, and that's even worse than not being a Muslim. And they will attack those Muslims who pray, for example, like the mosque where a woman is an imam. I mean, they got death threats. They had to stop right away. You know what I mean? So there's no way, because the actual doctrine and the religion itself, the texts are saying that is not true Islam. And a lot of people now are desperately trying to kind of change or manipulate the text to kind of make it a little bit more moderate, or they can't obviously manipulate the Quran, but they'll lie about the content, or they'll lie about the meaning, because Quran you can't modify it, obviously. It's not like unlike the Bible. But now the issue with that is, again, people will still go back and say that is not the true religion. That is not Quran. That is not what Muhammad has said. Look at that. Be honest. Here is what Muhammad said. The most honest Muslims are ISIS. Okay? The most honest Muslims are Wahhabi leaders, or when it comes to the doctrine itself. They're not honest as human beings, but they're honest about the content of Quran and Hadith.
Just to point out, you're not the first person to say this on my podcast. It's actually extremely typical that people say that.
Yeah. And one more thing, it's that's not the first time Islam has gone through reform. Since the very beginning of Islam, anybody who tried to reform it, they were killed, or they had issues. Or the only best example, the good example of reform of Islam is Al-Andalus, and they still had issues, people killing each other. So yes, Islam, the best way to solve the issue is to look at Islam as a personal thing. People have to start looking at it as a personal thing and stop making it like a way that you judge other people with. Like, Islam is a very judgmental religion. It encourages people to change others and not just yourself. You have to change others to make sure that they follow your religion. You have to Muslims who are not following the religion the way you follow it are considered infidels, and they're punishable, and they should suffer the consequences. And that is because it says that the true Muslims that are not following, or Muslims that are not following true Islam, are actually creating problems in society, and they should be punished. And that is why there's a lot of crime against Muslims themselves. And I think this whole idea about true Muslim and not true Muslim, or hypocritical Muslims, came from Muhammad himself, because he wanted to have one idea, one doctrine followed by everyone and applied the same exact way. It's a sect. So that is why it's unreformable. And you can talk about reform all day long, but it's really, really difficult, especially today, really difficult to be applied.
So the majority of Muslims are not Arab. In the top maybe 5 most populated Muslim countries are mostly non-Arab. However, the countries where most of the problems are coming from are Arab nations. And I think, and we've spoken about this before, but it has a lot to do with the fact that the Arab nations are principally the ones who can speak Arabic. And we've spoken that there is some truth to the fact that Islam is not just an Arab religion, it's an Arabic religion. It places a concentration on the language that other religions don't. It's not a principal rule in Christianity to pray in Aramaic or to read the Bible in Latin or ancient Greek. But in Islam, the importance of the language is not something that's similar to Christianity, really. And that possibly has a lot to do with the fact that most of the problems of extremism are concentrated in Arab majority countries. Do you agree with this a lot, or?
Yes, I do, 100%. That there is extremism in Afghanistan and some places, but not to the extent of the extremism we have in the Islamic world. I'll give you an example. Most ISIS members are Arabic speakers. I would say 99% of ISIS members are Arabic speakers. There are no Pakistanis in ISIS. There are no Afghanis in
Indonesians
ISIS.
Are probably, I mean, I know there are some, but it's rarer.
Some Russian, some Chechens, but the Chechens are Sunnis, and the Sunnis have a huge focus on learning Arabic. Sunnis, because they know Sunnis is following the Sunnah of Muhammad, and Muhammad preached learning Arabic, and that's why Arabic has evolved since Islam. It has evolved tremendously as a language. It's a very deep language, and you cannot really understand the hadiths and the religious nuances without learning Arabic. And to Christopher Hitchens' points, that Islam is only intelligible in Arabic, and I agree with him 100%.
Can I tell you my theory on this, and you can totally tell me if I'm completely wrong? But from what I'm gathering from what I'm studying and speaking to people and reading, is that one of the reasons the importance of the language was set in the religion by Muhammad was to actually prohibit innovation, was to prohibit people from changing the religion. And one of the ways he realized people change the religion is that the book itself comes under the power of other people outside the followers. So one person says, I'm the authority, like a pope figure, and says, I can bring new revelations. Or how the church itself had authority over the Bible. Most people didn't have Bibles under medieval Christianity, and the sermons were done in Latin. But him universalizing the language of Arabic, so now everybody has to read Arabic, and to guarantee that they could do that, they said, okay, you can learn Arabic by reading the Quran or memorizing the words of it. And since the followers have the Quran memorized themselves, that way someone else, another authority, can't tell them what it says. So this was a good way to put the power of the religion in the people, but it also kept the religion from changing, which created both a solution and a problem that the religion faces today. So, and that element of language wasn't found throughout the history of Christianity in the same way.
Right, and I believe in Quran it says, we have brought the Quran to you and we will protect it. إِنَّا نَحْنُ أَنزَلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. Like, we will protect the Quran for you. So it's unlike other religions. It says that the Quran was protected by God, like he didn't protect the Bible, for example, but he is protecting the Quran unlike he did with other books. If you think about it deeply, you'll find, well, why didn't he protect other books? Anyway, so that's a way for Muhammad to protect those ideas and not for them not to change, and of course to promote the the Arabic culture and the Arabic ideas that are within religion. And it's not easy to understand Quran when you don't speak Arabic, to be honest. As I was telling you earlier, there's the example of um, whoever killed one person is like they killed the entire humanity. And a lot of Westerners actually use that kind of quote unquote argument to say that Islam is a religion of peace, and that
even
you're not allowed.
President Obama used that phrase, which is 532, I think, in the Quran.
Yes.
And he used it when he gave his famous speech in Cairo. He used that phrase.
32, 32 and 33 from, but
33 is pretty nasty though.
Yeah,
it gets pretty ugly and violent in just the next verse of the Quran right after it.
It's so funny that the 32 says, whoever killed one, and it talks about the people of Israel. It talks about a completely different story, but yeah, the idea is, you cannot kill somebody without, a reason. And it says, it's funny that they translate whomever killed somebody, is like killing the entire humanity, but they leave a very important word that is mentioned in Arabic, which is fasad. Man qatala nafsan bighayri nafsin fasadin fil ard. The condition is fasad fil ard, corruption on earth. If you killed somebody without them having killed someone or committed corruption on earth, which is so vague. You can say to somebody, you've been drinking, you've been having sex with women, that's corruption on earth and will get you executed. You have left Islam, that's corruption on earth. But people want to leave that out because it serves their agenda. They don't want to be honest with this verse.
Well, and 533, at least as I read it in English, and you can tell me if the translation is close, is that if you also spread corruption against the prophet or God, then you must have your arms and limbs opposite to themselves amputated and burned, or maybe expelled in certain cases from the lands.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that is correct. That you couldn't have a politically correct translation for that one but people would not mention it as a proof for Islam being a religion of peace. They will say, "Oh, wait a second, that's out of context." But the one before wasn't out of context for some reason.
I'd love to know how amputating limbs, it can be reinterpreted into a better way. But if let me ask you this: what do you think about the term that's mainly controversial now, Islamism, to separate Islam from its political concepts? Do you agree with that word and how people use it, that there is Islam and Islamism, and that the problem is Islam? I'm sorry, the problem is Islamism and not Islam.
Okay, well, can I ask you one question? Is there a book of Islamism?
Well, yeah, it's called the Quran.
There you go. You have your answer. So Islamism is radical Islam is applying the Quran 100% and Hadith. No, Muhammad was an Islamist. Okay, so if you if you used Islamism, Muhammad was the biggest Islamist in history. So, uh, and Muhammad is the actual spiritual guide of all Muslims. It is the person who will look up to. He decapitated 600 Jews in one 600 people in one tribe for no reason, because they defied or didn't want to pay the tax or whatever. So he did many conquests, and people will not want to look into his personality and the troublesome thing he's done. And they wouldn't look into history. They wouldn't read about him. They just want to keep him as a spiritual, amazing, perfect person to look up to, without knowing exactly what he's been doing throughout his life. So, and that is the issue, because once you realize who Muhammad was, you will start moving away from Islam.
Is it possible for people to completely disconnect political Islam from just a spiritual Islam?
It is possible,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, it is possible, and that's probably the only glimpse of hope we have. But it's still, even if you're not a Muslim, even if you're not, uh, even if you disconnect that and just follow Islam as a religion for yourself, there are things that still will offend you as a Muslim. There are things, when you see somebody criticizing Islam as a religion, you will still get offended, and that we cannot move forward that way. Islamism as an idea or as a term came from, I believe, the first time I heard it being used was with the political jihad or political Islam in Algeria. They called themselves the Islamist movement, or le mouvement islamiste or islamique. So that a lot of Westerners or moderate Muslims that are against terrorism want to blame terrorism on a kind of a modified or like they call it the wrong version of Islam, and a modified Islam, corrupted Islam that is used for political gains. A lot of it is used for political gains, but a lot of it is Islam itself. They're applying Islam 100%. You cannot argue that this isn't Islam. If you look at the books, it is. So yeah, I mean, you can split the two, and some people are, a lot of Muslims I know. That's why not most Muslims are terrorists. That's why most Muslims are peaceful, because they were able to split up those two things, those two aspects, and not connected their beliefs to uh, like politically, or not believe in political Islam, or the need to control everyone and push everyone to follow their religion. I believe, though it's still a growing idea, that and now more and more people, as they get radicalized, quote unquote, meaning getting Islamized and becoming more Muslims, they start focusing on others and controlling others, and wanting to control others. And that is the issue with political Islam, is that you want to dominate your neighbor first and your family, but also you want to dominate the entire world with your ideas. You go, I am right, and everybody else has to follow the same exact word of uh, uh, preached by Muhammad. So I think it's important to have more and more people who don't follow political Islam, or who just think of Islam as a personal thing to them, and people who would tolerate Islam being criticized. I think if we can have that, just like we have in Christianity, most Christians, or I would say most of other religions that will allow criticism, I think we can move forward that way. And we need to stop. And Muslims need to be able to avoid conflict and getting upset over criticism of their religion. Uh, if they keep getting upset and killing people for criticizing or for their opinion, we can never move forward.
Most people in the West are very ignorant of the religion. It's not something that's taught in school.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely foreign, and it only really was forced into the public eye after 9/11. But nobody was prepared for it. Nobody had a background in education for it, except for maybe a few, very few experts. But suddenly everybody is talking about this part of the world that they don't know about the history, they don't know about the culture, they don't know about the religion, but they have to have an opinion on it. They just have to. There's no way around it.
Yes.
But it is an uninformed opinion. And it's not really their fault because their education didn't really prepare them for it. I think that's one solution, is to make more education of the region and of the religion compulsory.
Yeah, but then, what kind of religion are they going to teach the West? Are they going to
That's
talk?
yeah, that's kind
Yeah,
of
so
that what worries me. Who's going to teach those courses? Are they going to bring in Reza Aslan to teach those courses and people like him? Then it's not going to help, actually. And that's probably the people they'll choose, unfortunately.
yeah, that's exactly what they'll choose, and that's exactly what's popular. Nobody in the West wants to confront the issue head on. I can only name a few people. Douglas Murray is one of them. People who would actually confront it, and the majority of people that confront it are from the right wing, and the right wing in front of the rest of the world are just racist bigots. So they will use that, and they'll say they're just racist bigots who hate Muslims. They're not just stating facts. They're just racist bigots. So that is where the voice of ex-Muslims comes in, and they'll just go, yeah, we know about this. We've practiced it for years. We know Islam. We speak Arabic. Let's talk about it. And that actually makes people mad. That includes uh, that includes Westerners and Muslims alike. They do not want to hear us talk. They don't. And they don't want to hear Ayaan Hirsi Ali talk. They think she's using it to make money. They'll find the label for anybody so that they'll stop them from talking. They'll go, Hayyan Arsila Ali has sold her dignity and has sold her background, or religion, just to make money. And that's the label they will use for a lot of ex-Muslims. And it's unfortunate that that's the only people who can actually talk about it and articulate it and walk them through it are are ex-Muslims, and a lot of ex-Muslims actually do not want to talk. There are thousands of them, thousands, but do not talk because they don't want to face those consequences, security consequences, and they don't want to be shunned by their families, and they don't want to be put in the spot or called Islamophobic or whatever the case might be.
Is there anything last you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, peace and love. I hope we're not the enemies of Muslims. We're not the enemies of Arabs or anybody who's still practicing Islam. That whether they are Westerners or they're no matter where they are from. I'm kind of reaching out to Muslims to open their mind and sit down and discuss their religion, whether amongst each other or with us, ex-Muslims. You cannot just put a label and say these guys just left religion and they're stabbing their quote unquote brothers in the back. We're not doing that. We have gone through the same issues you're going through, and we're doing it because we know Islam is a bad idea. It's an old idea. It's a bad idea. We can evolve. We can be moral without it. Um, you can try to make it work and make it more kind of adapted with the current world we live in. But I believe that we have now more moral views than anything you could find in Islam itself or in any religion. We have morality that we have discussed and debated, and we have reached pretty fair laws in the world. We don't believe that cutting the person's hand off is morally acceptable or is acceptable today. Islam does not hold the monopoly of morality, so we should evolve and move forward. You can keep Islam as a spirituality. You can believe in your God the way you want to. Just don't force it on others and don't judge others. Start by judging yourself. Try to be a better person and do not stop people from criticizing your religion, because we will always criticize your religion. That will not stop.